Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to our Team Tuesday this week with Gert Brits. Hey Gert, welcome back.
Hi.
So we will talk about teams in a second, Gert, but before we do that, do share with us, what is potentially the most influential book in your career as a Scrum Master?
Okay. This one is very difficult to answer. There are two that had a massive influence on me. The one is Drive by Daniel Pink, and the other one is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F by Mark Manson.
Share with us why. Like, what did these books give you?
So Drive by Daniel Pink is about people's internal motivations, and it talks about using the carrot or stick mechanisms. It talks about different ways of exploring and understanding and learning about motivation. For me, I've always loved personality tests or things like that where I could get to learn about myself, but I've never actually gone into things like what are my motivations, what career path am I after, what kind of person do I want to be at work. So when I read this, I got a lot of self-awareness about things that haven't been exposed yet, things that I hadn't thought about yet. And with that self-awareness, it created a heightened awareness of other people's motivations, because that's something they talk about in the book. Everyone has their own internal drivers. And if you don't know what those are, it's a very small chance that you might be able to help that person. If you don't know what somebody's pressures are or stresses or the environment around them, the demands on them, you don't know what's driving their behavior. You don't know what's pushing them forward. And you could look at it and frame a perspective or narrative on that person's actions that are massively incorrect. So reading this book helped me slow down a bit and do a bit of the slow thinking that I need to do as much as possible of around why is this person doing this? Where does this come from? And then shortly after that, I read the book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F. And this one spoke about how much energy you use and how much engagement or motivation or time. Very much like if you could imagine you've got a bucket that you fill full of water, and that's your finite amount of how much of yourself you can give. Where are you going to pour this out? Where are you going to split this across? There are ways to recharge this bucket. We talk about resilience very much now with the whole working from home and hybrid working thing. So there are ways to recharge this bucket, but at any given time, there is a maximum amount on this. And if it runs out, it's almost like the airlines say, put your face mask on first before you put somebody else's face mask on. If your energy or your passion or your motivation runs out, most likely you're going to crash, and there's going to be people that were relying on you that will also have a knock-on effect from that. So this book was very, very helpful in giving me a strong sense about finding out what the most impactful things I'm passionate about, and go after those. Because as a Scrum Master, as a coach, when you join a company, even engineers, as any role, when you join a company, you start seeing all the things that they do differently. And you start asking yourself, oh, why are they doing it like that? This way is so much better. And you start seeing 20, 30, 50 different challenges or problems that could be easily solved. And if you try and spread that bucket over those 50 things, you're going to be exhausted. So these two books had a very, very big influence for me. And I learned, what is it that motivates me? What is it that I'm passionate about? How do I align that with something impactful in the companies, in the teams, in the one-on-one conversations that I work with people? I had a few challenges as well, trying to work with people in the past. Maybe you could call them difficult stakeholders. And when dealing with this, there's a few things that I've learned over time. One is actually from a game called Dungeons and Dragons. You create a character and you create this whole backstory of how this character got to where they are. And over time, you get to know this and you get to learn this about the person, and you kind of become a team, or you know how to work better with them because you've learned what it is that drives them, what it is that they want to achieve, or maybe something they're running away from. And in the industry, in the workplaces, you don't know what kind of metrics this person is being held accountable for, whether they're fair or not. You don't know what kind of performance appraisal or reviews this person has and how that affects their choice of what goes on the backlog. So it's important that everyone needs to learn about this and everyone needs to understand that there are different pressures, motivations, and different reasons. And asking about these things and digging deeper into them are very useful.
I like that. I like that phrase of asking and digging deeper, because very often the people themselves are not aware of those.
Exactly.
Right? They may be acting as a result of pressure from evaluation that is coming up, and maybe the metrics that they need to look at, but they may not be fully aware. Right? Like a very common problem with us is with all humans is that we attribute our behavior to something we understand, even if
Yes.
there are other things we don't understand that are influencing our behavior. And of course, the next question makes this realization even more important. So we know that sometimes even great teams get into these patterns of self-destruction, right? Like certain things just start growing and growing, and they take their own dynamic and eventually cause big problems. So share one of those stories with us, Gert, and walk us through like the initial signs that didn't look like much at the time, but of course now in retrospect, they are, telltale signs that something was going wrong. So tell us that story.
Yes. So I'll give you a little bit of context first. I was working at a company named Spotify, and I was working with one of their teams called the Developer Advocate team. When this team came out, this is about 4 years ago, it was quite new in the industry. A developer advocate would act as a liaison between the organization and relevant developer communities. So this was something like they wanted to enable open sourcing. Backstage.io is an example of this, and it's actually something that came from Spotify. It's an open platform for building developer portals. So this team was tasked with how do we how do we open source some of our code so that people in the community can solve some of these challenges and become involved and get more engagement from the communities around us. So challenges that the team faced was that it was very new in the industry. Quite a lot of people weren't sure what specifically it needed to look like or how it needed to change, what kind of actions or outputs you'd be looking for. This team was quite a small team. It had 3 active members with an engineering manager and a product manager. And because of this and the amount of work and pressure put on this team, they started working in a siloed manner. Each one of them kind of picked up their own specializations and they didn't really cross over to each other. This is one of the patterns that I noticed very quickly is, are people working on things together or are people kind of like sitting on their own, solving things on their own? And some people really like that kind of environment. I always believe that it's good to have some kind of balance. So if you want to have alone time, like 60%, 40% working with your team or in a group or pairing, it's a very, very interesting question. But back to the signs, the behaviors that I saw is people would make things a personal comment. Oh, you arrived late today, so because of you, we can't make this live. Instead of having a conversation around, we usually make things live at this time. We need everyone available. We need 2 people available. So making things personal instead of focusing on the actual facts, the actual thing that happened. There was a lack of understanding around what each person wanted to do, as well as what each person could do. So quite a lot of the time they were asked to do other work, and there wasn't ever really a question of how do you function in this role. People weren't talking about things, so they needed to learn mechanisms and topics, mechanisms to raise the topics. When this happens, something goes wrong.
So when you say people weren't talking about things, you mean like they saw something happen and instead of bringing it up and discussing it as a team, they just let it in and then kind of maybe even tried to fix it on their own or something like that?
Very much so. Very much so. There was a very strong relationship between the manager and each individual in the team. And they would have 2 or 3 one-on-ones a week with a manager as a support structure just to keep them going because there were so many things happening. One of the mechanisms we introduced was that they have one-on-ones with each other. And this was very risky in the beginning because there were tensions, there were frustrations. And they kind of started about like talking about hobbies and movies they liked and things. But because they had that more exposure to each other, eventually they started airing, oh, when you do this, it impacts me like that. We started doing retrospectives with them more often, more frequently. I think they would do them once every 3 months or something like that, which maybe it was okay at some stage, but things had gotten to a point where they needed to speak more often. And there's something that you can find online called the Spotify Health Check that's quite useful. So we did that and really dug into the details and the results of those. And just with giving them all of these metrics, all of these mechanisms to talk about things, eventually they started focusing on the patterns and the impacts a little bit more than who it was that was doing it. And they learned there was actually a phrase that they said, focus on it rather than them, which was quite a nice thing that eventually emerged out of this team. We also had a few roles and responsibilities discussions, and I made these quite informal because I wanted it more to be a conversation between them instead of looking at something structured like a RACI chart or something. I just wanted them to have a chat and say, I expect this from you. Is that fair or not? And the other person responded, that's okay, I can do that, but I can't do the second thing, and this is why. So just having that very comfortable, safe conversation around expectations on each other, that helped him quite a lot as a team.
Yeah, and this roles and responsibilities discussion very often loses from that formalism that you talked about, like RACI chart, because very often it's not. It might be something that I feel that I can't necessarily put it as a responsibility, but it's something I need help with, right?
Exactly.
And I can say, hey, I need help with this. Like there's this part that I don't know what's going on, but every time I come back from a weekend, this is broken. What is going on, right? Like, exactly. and I think that's a great point, that sometimes the roles and responsibilities conversation can be much better supported by having an informal conversation than to go through like a very detailed, structured,
very much so,
like RACI chart or something like that.
I've seen a lot of people put a lot of structure around things, and especially myself when I was starting out as a Scrum Master, I had these frameworks and recipes and things which are good. And I actually had 1 or 2 teams say, this is way too structured. I can't have this conversation in this way. And I had to act on the fly and find a way to make it easier, because going through the conversation was more important than the structure that I followed. So making it a conversation, taking steps out of things. I call it process debt. Now, we're probably all quite familiar with technical debt where things just build up and build up. I call it process debt. And I go into a team and I'm like, why are you doing this? Is this actually something that's giving you value? Or is it something that you learned 3 years ago and you're still doing it for some reason?
Absolutely, which is in itself a great question. Gert, thank you very much for sharing this story with us.
That's a pleasure.
Tuesday is Team Day here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. But tomorrow we talk about something that goes beyond the work we do with the teams. We will talk about how to lead change and what our guests have learned from leading and participating in change programs during their career. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.